Get your hands off that car right now and stay still. You don't belong here. The officer's voice cracked through the still morning air, loud, public, and slicing with intent. It wasn't just a command, it was a declaration meant to strip away not only dignity, but freedom. Seconds later, David Alexander was slammed face first into the asphalt. His arm was twisted unnaturally, pain tearing through his wrist as a knee pressed down on the back of his neck. Strangers watched, silent yet complicit, while he was pinned, humiliated, and bleeding in front of them. In that instant, long before any judge or jury had a say, the officers who held him to the ground didn't just destroy his body, they obliterated their careers, their futures, and the very authority they believed was unquestionable. Before we dive deeper into this moment, where are you watching from? If you believe that stories like this matter and accountability still holds weight in a modern America, subscribe and like this video. Your support ensures that voices like David's are heard even when society tries to silence them. David Alexander lay still beneath the crushing weight, his breathing calm and deliberate. Panic would only give them the control they craved. At 47 years old, with over 2 decades of service in the Los Angeles Police Department, he had learned that calmness itself was a form of resistance. He knew exactly what was happening, and more importantly, why it was happening. What none of the officers surrounding him knew yet was that this was David's first official morning as the chief of the Southridge Police Department. He had arrived early, on purpose. He wanted to see the town before the ceremony, before the speeches, before the introductions and the press photos. He needed to witness the place he was about to lead with his own eyes. So he parked at the nearby gas station, filled up his tank, and watched the department headquarters, soon to be his own responsibility. His suit was nothing flashy, simple, sharp, and tailored to precision. Every detail of David's demeanor reflected years of discipline and earned experience. But that meant nothing to Officer Brian Connors. To Connors, this wasn't a seasoned lawman standing before him. This was just a black man in an expensive car, someone who didn't belong, at least not in Connors' world. Connors had been on the force for 22 years, but in those years, resentment had grown in his heart, festering. He saw the world changing, moving past him, promotions slipping through his fingers, and the respect he thought he deserved evaporating. When he saw David, something inside him hardened. It wasn't curiosity, it was judgment, a verdict already formed in his mind. With his rookie partner, Matt Doyle, young, eager, but unsure of himself, Connors crossed the street with determination, a sense of authority burning in his chest. The cruiser pulled up, blocking David's car from leaving. The tone was set before any words were exchanged. David turned slowly, his hands clearly visible. His posture remained calm, controlled. He recognized the pattern before Connors even opened his mouth. He asked, politely, for the reason behind his detainment. But instead of answering with the truth, Connors responded with contempt, a wave of judgment, not law. He questioned ownership. He questioned whether David belonged there. Each word from Connors wasn't an inquiry, it was an attack. David responded the only way a professional could. He stated the facts, asserting his rights, calm and unwavering. He did not raise his voice. That composure, that calm, seemed to enrage Connors even more. Minutes passed, and with them the crowd around them grew. Mothers paused with their children at the crosswalk. A construction worker halted his steps, eyes glued to the scene. Teenagers lifted their phones, not hiding the cameras this time. A gas station attendant stood nearby, recording with no hesitation. A retired professor who had seen these abuses of power before watched closely and remained. David spoke clearly now, aware of every recording device in the area. He gave his name. He refused consent to any searches. He demanded legal justification. Every word was measured, deliberate, not for Connors, but for history to remember. Doyle, looking uneasy but desperate to fit in, claimed he smelled drugs. David recognized the lie immediately. The air was thick with false accusations, but Connors wasn't done. He escalated. And with that, 2 more officers arrived. None of them intervened. Silence thickened. The authority became a circle, a wall of bodies closing in on one man. David felt the shift before the violence came. As his hand reached for his phone, intent on documenting the badge numbers, Connors shouted a false warning, trying to justify what was coming next. The takedown was swift, brutal. David's face met the concrete with sickening force. His wrist twisted in the wrong direction, pain like fire shooting up his arm. Connors' knee dug into the back of David's neck, not to restrain, but to crush. Commands were shouted, but David was already following them. He had no choice. Around them, voices rose in protest. Someone shouted for them to stop. The retired professor stepped forward, but he was shoved aside. Phones continued recording the chaos unfolding. The truth was being captured from every angle. Matt Doyle, now visibly panicking, noticed the cameras. Fear, raw and unmistakable, replaced the brief moments of confidence. He turned away, instinctively reaching for his own throat, his panic manifesting in a self-inflicted wound. Blood drew from his skin, but when he faced the crowd again, it was to shout a baseless accusation, a desperate attempt to confuse the situation. David, struggling to breathe under the crushing weight of Connors, still found his voice. His words were rasped, barely audible through the weight pressing down on him, but they carried a force that no one could ignore. This isn't how justice works. His voice was strained but steady. The words spilled from him, carefully chosen, deliberate. He named the act. He identified the offense. There was no panic, only a calm, practiced authority, like a man who knew the law not as a weapon, but as a sacred duty. It was the kind of quiet resolve that could break a person or build a movement. John Harlan's face twisted. His anger, now mixed with something close to desperation, burned in his chest. He wasn't just trying to arrest this man, he was trying to break him. But then, everything shifted. As David was hauled upright to be cuffed, his torn jacket shifted. The sunlight caught metal at his waist. A badge, heavy, official, unmistakable. The crowd's murmur turned to a gasp. Shock rippled through the onlookers. For a moment, the world held its breath. Harlan looked down at the badge. He froze. In that split second, everything changed. The officer who had been abusing his power was now staring into the face of the law itself. The authority he thought he wielded was now standing in front of him, broken, injured, but undeniable in its command. David straightened as much as his battered body would allow. Blood smeared across his face, his left arm dangling useless. But his voice, unwavering and firm, carried over the crowd like a rallying cry. He identified himself as chief. No need for drama, no need to shout. Every word he spoke landed with the weight of truth. Each sentence, each violation he listed was like a verdict that had already been delivered, regardless of what came next. The air seemed to crackle. Donnelly, his partner, stumbled backward. One officer lowered his gaze. Another froze, hand half raised to his radio, unsure of how to process the unfolding truth. There was no more tension in the air, only the heavy silence of realization. David did not shout. He did not threaten. He didn't need to. He took control. He called for immediate suspensions. He requested federal investigators. And all the while, the cameras rolled. The truth was being preserved. His words were not just for the officers, but for history. Witnesses cried out, some in disbelief, others in relief. This was no misunderstanding. This was not a bad stop. This was exposure, a moment when unchecked power met the cold, hard truth and collapsed under its weight. On a quiet Wednesday morning, in full public view, the old guard revealed itself for exactly what it was, and in doing so, they handed David Alexander the clearest mandate any leader could ever receive. David remained upright only because discipline had trained him to endure pain without surrendering control. His breathing was shallow but steady. each breath a small victory against the storm of violence around him. Every movement around him confirmed what he already knew. This was no routine stop. This was a power play, carried out without cause and without restraint. Just like his daily routine, David relied on the kind of strength that could only come from his disciplined approach to health and wellness. The supplements he incorporated, like Advanced Muscle Plus, played an important role in maintaining his physical strength. In moments like this, when every ounce of endurance mattered, his body, conditioned and resilient, was just as essential as his mental toughness. Harlan paced in front of him now, circling, his movements rehearsed. He thought he was performing for an audience that would always side with him. Mike Donnelly, younger and unsure, stayed close by, mirroring his partner's every move, trying to learn what loyalty looked like in these moments. The two additional officers, Sofia Ramirez and Chris Fletcher, hung back, but their positions were clear. Silent agreement, the circle of power tightening further. No one told Harlan to stop. That silence was deafening. It was consent. Harlan leaned in closer, his breath reeking of stale coffee, invading David's space with hostile intent. "You still haven't told me why you're really here," he said, voice low but sharp, his words intentionally chosen to provoke. David didn't answer the question. He didn't need to. Instead, he spoke to the record. His words were precise, matter-of-fact. "I'm legally parked. I've committed no crime. I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle." His voice was steady, ringing clearly into the silent air. Phones continued to record. But Harlan didn't want clarity. He wanted submission. Donnelly, now visibly nervous, shifted closer to the passenger side of the car and pretended to sniff the air. "I'm detecting a strong odor of marijuana," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. David's head turned slowly. His gaze was sharp. "That statement is false," he replied, his tone cold, unwavering. "There are no illegal substances in my vehicle. I do not use them." The lie hung in the air, unsupported, glaringly obvious. But it didn't matter. Harlan nodded as if he'd just confirmed a fact that didn't exist. Probable cause was manufactured in real time. With deliberate disrespect, Harlan reached for David's wallet. Without permission, he rifled through the ID, treating it as if it were his right. "San Francisco, that explains a lot." He looked up with a smirk. "People like you come here thinking rules don't apply." David's heart sank, but he remained composed. The weight of history pressed down on him, but he did not respond with anger. He responded with precision. He informed Harlan that taking his property without consent or cause was unlawful, that the detention was illegal. He asked again for a supervisor. That request irritated Harlan more than anything. To him, it sounded like defiance, a challenge to his authority. He gestured sharply, and the situation swelled. Another cruiser arrived, then another. Radios crackled. The circle of officers tightened. Marcus counted faces, counted cameras, counted witnesses. He understood that this moment would not stay contained. The truth would not be confined. Luisa Gomez, watching from the gas station window, felt a chill. She had seen this before, but never so openly. Her hand shook as she held her phone steady. Outside, Dr. Eleanor Hayes stood, keys still in hand, watching with a growing sense of alarm. She recognized the imbalance immediately. She knew the tone. She understood the danger. Harlan's voice grew louder. "You're being detained," he snapped. "Step away from the vehicle." David complied, slowly, deliberately. Each movement narrated. He didn't reach suddenly. He didn't argue. He didn't resist. He simply stated that he was complying under protest. His words were clear, though the officers chose to ignore them. Donnelly shifted uneasily. His glance flickered toward the phones, the bystanders, and then back to Harlan. His confidence wavered, and the nerves showed. Harlan noticed. His reaction was predictable. He escalated. He stepped closer to David, chest nearly touching his. "In this town," Harlan growled, "you show respect." The implication was unmistakable. David met his gaze without flinching. "Respect is not demanded," he replied calmly. "It is earned through lawful conduct." That sentence, those words, broke something fragile. Harlan's face hardened. He stepped back, then another. His eyes narrowed, and David could feel the change in the air. He knew exactly what would come next. Slowly, carefully, David reached for his phone, not to threaten, not to provoke, but to document, to bear witness. But Harlan shouted before David could finish the motion. His words, false, desperate, ripped through the air. "You're resisting!" The violence came fast. The sound of David's body hitting the concrete was deafening. Pain exploded through his body. His wrist snapped. He heard the crack before he felt it. Then the knee came down, on his neck, heavy, relentless. Each breath became a struggle. His world narrowed. The crowd reacted instantly. Shouts, screams. Someone cried out that he couldn't breathe. Dr. Hayes rushed forward, grabbing at Harlan's arm in a desperate plea, but she was shoved aside without hesitation. She fell hard, the pain flaring through joints already worn with age. The phones never lowered. They rose higher, capturing every moment. The truth was being preserved, frame by frame. David focused on his breathing. He forced each word out, strained but steady, carefully choosing his phrasing. "I am not resisting. Your knee is on my neck. This force is excessive and unlawful." His voice was strained, but it was steady. Years of courtroom testimony, years of speaking to people who didn't want to listen, trained him for moments like this. The crowd gasped, phones shook, hands trembling, but they did not lower. They captured every second, every word. Every second was being preserved. The weight of each moment, each word was etched into the air. Harlan heard the truth in Marcus's words, but instead of retreating, he responded with anger. No restraint, no remorse. Calm unnerved him. Composure threatened his fragile sense of authority. "Shut up!" he barked, driving his weight down harder, as if force could erase the evidence that hung in the air. To Harlan, this was no longer about suspicion, no longer about procedure. It was about control. It was about proving that the badge still bent reality to his will. Harlan leaned in close, his words venomous, whispers meant to wound. Each syllable soaked in bitterness, entitlement, and power. Marcus absorbed them without flinching. His mind was already set on one goal: stay conscious, stay precise, let the truth do the work. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, who had witnessed enough, could not stay silent. She pushed forward again, her knees and hands aching, but the urgency in her bones drove her forward. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and unwavering. "Stop! Stop this right now! I demand a supervisor," she said, the authority of decades of law and protest ringing in her voice. But Harlan shoved her aside, harder this time, sending her sprawling onto the cold concrete. The witnesses flinched. The crowd's outrage was palpable. A teenager's voice cracked as he screamed, "Stop! Please stop!" Luisa Gomez stepped fully outside, phone in hand, her knuckles white with the effort to steady it. She knew that what she was recording would matter. Mike Donnelly stood just behind Harlan, frozen in place, the weight of his indecision growing heavier with every second. His eyes darted to Marcus's still form, the knee pressing down mercilessly on his neck, then to the growing crowd. The cameras, the phones. He saw the change in the air. This wasn't what he had imagined when he signed up. This wasn't the controlled, assured authority he had been promised. Fear crept in, cold and sharp. The moment slipped away from him. His loyalty was torn between his fellow officers and the witnesses watching. And then panic won. In a desperate attempt to create a narrative that might erase the truth, Donnelly turned his back to the crowd, just long enough to convince himself he was unseen. He raised his hands and dragged his fingernails violently across his own throat, skin tearing. Blood spilled instantly, shocking and hot. He gasped in pain, but the adrenaline forced him forward. He spun back toward the crowd, eyes wide, desperation pouring from him. "He attacked me!" Donnelly shouted, voice high, strained. "You all saw it! He attacked me!" The reaction was instant, and it was unforgiving. "No, you didn't! You did that to yourself!" came the voices, angry, certain. Louisa shouted from the doorway, "I've got it on camera!" Dr. Hayes, trembling but resolute, stepped forward. "I saw what happened. He didn't touch you." The fixed security camera above the gas station door captured the entire scene in crystal clear detail. There was no missing angle, no confusion, no room for interpretation. The truth was there, for everyone to see. Marcus, still crushed under Harlan's knee, summoned the strength to speak. His voice was strained but clear. "Officer Donnelly," he began, each word a deliberate statement. "You have just inflicted injury upon yourself and falsely accused me of assault. That is a serious criminal offense." The words struck like a hammer, landing with a force that reverberated through the crowd. They were not shouted, not even raised in anger. They were stated as fact, with calm authority. For a moment, Harlan hesitated. He was a man who believed in his own infallibility, but Marcus's voice, unwavering and precise, made him question his certainty. Authority, when spoken with absolute certainty, still carried power. Harlan tightened his grip, his anger now edged with something else: fear. "You think you're smart?" he snarled, his breath hot and ragged. "You think talking is going to save you?" He grabbed Marcus and hauled him upright with unnecessary force. Marcus staggered, his injured arm hanging uselessly. Pain shot through him, so sharp that it nearly stole his vision. Blood dripped onto the concrete, mixing with the dirt beneath him. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in closer, capturing every detail. As Harlan yanked Marcus upright, fabric tore. The tailored jacket, once sharp and clean, split at the seam and fell aside. The sunlight caught something at Marcus's waist, something heavy, unmistakable. The badge. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Dr. Hayes froze mid-step, her breath caught in her throat. "Wait," she said, disbelief in her voice, her eyes locked on the badge. "That badge!" Her words sliced through the noise like glass. Harlan looked down without thinking. His eyes landed on the gold star hanging from Marcus's belt. His face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Donnelly's eyes widened in terror. He stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, nearly falling into the frame of a teenager's phone. The other officers, frozen in place, stiffened, their faces twisted with confusion, fear, and uncertainty. Marcus, though injured and battered, straightened as much as his body would allow. His breathing was labored, blood marked his face, his wrist throbbed with every heartbeat. Still, he stood tall. His posture commanded authority, and he spoke without hesitation. "I am Chief Marcus Thompson," he said, his voice carrying over the stunned silence. "You have just assaulted your commanding officer. You have illegally detained me, searched me, and used excessive force under color of law. These actions constitute serious civil rights violations." Each sentence landed with finality. Radios crackled. No one spoke. And then Harlan's knees buckled. He collapsed, not out of respect, but in complete collapse, unable to maintain his facade. "Chief," he stammered, desperation spilling from his voice. "We didn't know. Please." Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He responded with cold, deliberate clarity. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said evenly. "You needed to follow the law. You chose not to." And then, the crowd erupted. Cheers broke out, some loud, others more restrained but no less powerful. Some cried openly, while others stood in stunned silence, hands pressed to their mouths. overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. Phones continued recording. Marcus, still moving with purpose, reached down with his uninjured hand and took Harlan's radio. His movements were slow but deliberate. He lifted the device to his mouth and spoke clearly, his voice steady despite the pain coursing through his body. "Dispatch," he said. "This is Chief Marcus Thompson. Send FBI Civil Rights and Internal Affairs to the Shell Station on Bayview Avenue immediately. 4 officers are suspended pending investigation." In that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. What had begun as unchecked violence, born from prejudice, had now been turned into exposure, sealed with undeniable evidence. There would be no quiet reports, no buried footage, no excuses strong enough to outrun the truth. The record was complete, and everyone present understood. There was no going back. The moment the badge caught the light, authority crumbled. What had seconds ago been noise, shouting, and aggressive certainty was now silent, still, and painfully clear. John Harlan remained kneeling on the concrete, his hands hovering uselessly in front of him. His posture was no longer commanding. It was empty, drained of meaning. Mike Donnelly stood several steps back, his blood streaking his neck, the earlier accusation now hanging over him like a confession he could never take back. Sophia Ramirez and Chris Fletcher avoided every camera, every eye that now judged them. They stood in the shadows, knowing the consequences of their silence. At the center of it all, standing tall, breathing with effort but unmistakably in control, stood Marcus Thompson. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not savor the reversal. He did not lecture. He spoke with the calm precision of a man who understood that every word would be replayed, dissected, and remembered. "You are relieved of duty," he said to Harlan, his voice even, final, effective immediately. No hesitation, no negotiation. Harlan tried to speak. His mouth opened, but the words came too late. Marcus stopped him with a simple gesture. "Do not speak," he said. "Anything you say now will become part of a federal record." The warning was chilling, but it landed hard. Harlan's shoulders slumped for the first time. He looked smaller, diminished. The power had drained from him, and he could feel it. Marcus turned toward Donnelly. The younger officer's eyes were wide, unfocused. "You will remain where you are," Marcus said. "Medical personnel will document your injuries. Federal investigators will document how they occurred." Donnelly nodded weakly, understanding too late that his lie had been captured from every angle. Panic had sealed his fate. Marcus then faced Ramirez and Fletcher. His words were direct. "You did not intervene. You did not report. You chose silence." The words hit hard, cutting deep into both officers. They lowered their eyes, understanding that neutrality had not protected them. Silence had placed them on the wrong side of the record. The crowd finally exhaled. Some clapped, not loudly but with restrained disbelief. Others cried openly. Dr. Eleanor Hayes stood, tears streaming down her face, not from fear or pain, but from vindication. She had spent her life believing that the law mattered only when it was enforced. Now she was watching as the law turned inward. Luisa Gomez lowered her phone, wiped her eyes, then raised it again. She knew this moment would be studied, replayed, and argued over. She wanted to capture it cleanly. Marcus reached for the radio again, his injured arm trembling, but he steadied himself. "Dispatch," he said, his voice steady and firm. "This is Chief Marcus Thompson. I am requesting immediate response from Internal Affairs and the FBI Civil Rights Division to the Shell Station on Bayview Avenue. This scene is now under federal jurisdiction." The response crackled back, stunned but compliant. Sirens began to echo in the distance, the sound of justice in motion. And then, Marcus did something no one expected. He addressed the witnesses directly. "Do not stop recording," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "Preserve your footage. You will be contacted." His words transformed the crowd. They were no longer just witnesses, they were participants in accountability. The instruction validated every shaking hand holding a phone, every person who had chosen not to look away. Paramedics arrived, moving cautiously through the crowd, which parted without resistance. They approached Marcus with practiced efficiency, their eyes scanning for injuries, but they were careful, respectful, aware that their work was unfolding in front of a watching world. They examined his wrist, checked his breathing, and documented the bruising already darkening his neck. One medic urged him to lie down. Marcus shook his head, his voice low but firm. "Not yet," he said. "Secure the scene first." The request was not reckless, it was decisive. Leadership for Marcus had never meant comfort, it meant responsibility. As medical staff worked, additional units arrived, but this time under very different authority. Internal affairs officers began separating individuals, marking positions, and noting witness names. Federal agents arrived, quietly but decisively. Their presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. The local officers who had once seemed untouchable now looked uncertain, restrained, and exposed.
FBI Special Agent Lisa Chen arrived less than an hour after the call. Her calm, composed demeanor immediately set the tone. She surveyed the scene, taking in the crowd, the cameras, the blood, and the stunned expressions on the faces of officers who now understood the magnitude of what they had done. Her eyes met Marcus's for a brief moment. No words were necessary. There was no ceremony, no introduction. She simply said, "We'll take it from here." Marcus nodded once. "I expect nothing less," he replied, his voice steady despite the pain radiating through his body. Harlan was placed in handcuffs by federal agents, not by Marcus. The sound of the cuffs snapping shut was sharp, final, and irreversible action. The crowd watched, eerily silent, as he was hauled to his feet. His face was pale, his earlier confidence, now a distant memory, evaporated completely. He tried once more to speak, his voice cracking with desperation, but Marcus did not respond. Some conversations end without acknowledgement. Donnelly was escorted separately, still muttering weak, incoherent explanations, still insisting that everything had happened too quickly. But the agents did not argue. They did not challenge him. They did not need to. The cameras had already answered every question he tried to avoid. Ramirez and Fletcher were taken aside, informed of their status. Cooperation was mentioned. Consequences were implied. Both officers nodded silently, the weight of their inaction sinking in. They now realized that silence had cost them far more than they had ever imagined. By the time Marcus was finally guided onto a stretcher, news alerts had already begun lighting up phones across the country. Videos were already live. Commentators reacted. Millions were watching. But Marcus focused only on the moment in front of him. Reform was no longer a promise he would make from behind a desk. It was an obligation written in pain, in evidence, and in the public record. As the stretcher doors closed, Marcus allowed himself one controlled breath. His wrist throbbed, his neck burned, and his body ached in ways that would linger long after the scene faded from view. This was not how he had planned his first day as chief, but change rarely began with speeches, rarely with policies. It began with exposure so complete, so undeniable, that denial became impossible. Across the street, the Oak Ridge Police Department headquarters stood unchanged. The flag still waved, the glass still reflected the sky, but everything beneath them had shifted. The old guard had revealed itself fully in daylight. Before witnesses, it could not intimidate or silence. And now, under Marcus Thompson's command, the department would have no choice but to confront what it had tried for too long to ignore. The aftermath unfolded with a speed that stunned even seasoned investigators. By the time Marcus Thompson was taken from the gas station to the hospital, the incident had already transcended the limits of Oak Ridge.
The videos moved faster than any official statement could ever dream of. They crossed state lines in minutes, national borders in hours. Millions watched a black police chief pinned to the ground by his own officers. They heard his calm voice naming violations as they happened. They saw a younger officer injure himself in panic. They witnessed the exact moment a badge shattered a lie. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for spin. The truth had arrived, intact. At the hospital, physicians confirmed what Marcus already knew in his bones. His wrist was fractured cleanly, ligaments torn. His neck bore deep bruising, consistent with dangerous restraint. Cuts along his face required stitches. He endured the examinations without complaint, answering questions clearly, correcting details when necessary. Pain did not distract him. His focus remained fixed on the consequences that were already in motion. This was not just an assault, it was a systemic failure, and it demanded a systemic response. Within minutes of Marcus's departure, federal agents secured the Shell station on Bayview Avenue. The scene, once a place of chaos, had transformed into a controlled investigative site. Yellow tape went up. Access was restricted. FBI Special Agent Lisa Chen supervised every step with precision. Surveillance footage was seized. Dash cameras were downloaded. Body camera data was preserved without gaps. Radio logs were pulled. Dispatch records were frozen. No device was overlooked. No delay was tolerated. The investigation moved with a sense of urgency born of certainty. This was no longer a question of what had happened. The question now was how deep the rot went. John Harland was taken into federal custody that same afternoon. The charges were read to him carefully, formally, without theatrics. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law, aggravated assault, false imprisonment. Each charge carried significant prison time. Each stripped away another layer of the authority he once wielded so casually. His badge was removed. His weapon was logged as evidence. His uniform became irrelevant. The man who had barked orders hours earlier now spoke barely above a whisper. Seniority meant nothing against the recorded facts. Mike Donnelly, once a figure of authority, was treated for his self-inflicted wounds under guard. Medical staff documented the injuries with surgical precision. Investigators asked him to explain what had happened. They played the footage. They asked again. His statements contradicted the video almost immediately. The record reflected that contradiction in plain language. By nightfall, Donnelly faced his own set of charges: fabrication of evidence, filing a false report, and civil rights violations. The act meant to save him had become the clearest proof of his guilt. Sophia Ramirez and Chris Fletcher were placed on administrative leave pending review. Their interviews were calm, methodical, and unforgiving. They admitted they had seen nothing that justified the force used. They admitted they had stayed silent. Their cooperation was noted. Their failure to intervene was also noted. Silence once again carried consequences. Marcus remained hospitalized overnight. Reporters gathered outside in growing numbers. Cameras waited. Questions piled up. But Marcus declined interviews. Instead, he released a short written statement through the city attorney. It acknowledged the investigation, confirmed full cooperation, and stated plainly that accountability would be complete. Nothing more was required. The footage spoke louder than any press conference ever could. By the next morning, Oak Ridge was under national scrutiny. Federal officials confirmed the investigation publicly. Civil rights organizations demanded oversight agreements. Legal scholars explained the violations in simple terms. Police unions issued carefully worded statements that avoided defending the indefensible. Local politicians were forced to respond. Silence was no longer a viable option. Within 48 hours, the videos had been viewed hundreds of millions of times. Experts paused frames, analyzed posture, timing, and language. Former officers described proper procedure and pointed out every deviation. Commentators replayed the moment Donnelly injured himself, the moment the badge appeared, the moment authority reversed. The narrative did not change. It hardened. Facts have a way of doing that. Marcus returned to headquarters with his wrist in a cast and bruises still visible along his neck. But he did not retreat behind closed doors. He convened an emergency departmental briefing. Attendance was mandatory. The room fell silent when he entered. He spoke without notes, without embellishment. "This department will be examined in full," he began. "Every use of force, every complaint, every supervisory decision, there will be no exceptions." His voice was calm, but the message was absolute. Internal Affairs expanded its review immediately. Patterns emerged quickly. Complaints dismissed without inquiry, reports softened by supervisors, officers shielded by seniority. What had been described as isolated incidents revealed themselves as a culture, one of complacency and complicity. That culture was now exposed to the full glare of federal scrutiny. Subpoenas followed. Training materials, disciplinary files, promotion records, emails and text messages. Nothing remained sealed. No delay was tolerated. The department's public image fractured under scrutiny, but Marcus did not attempt to defend it. Exposure was the price of reform. He accepted that cost without hesitation. John Harlan's personal life unraveled with brutal speed. His union declined representation. His pension was frozen pending conviction. His wife filed for divorce. His eldest son cut contact entirely. The social circle that once reinforced his worldview disappeared. The authority he had relied on evaporated, leaving him exposed, vulnerable. Donnelly fared no better. His attempt to deceive made him a symbol of cowardice, even among those inclined to excuse misconduct. Inside holding, he was isolated. Outside, his name became shorthand for disgrace. The stigma attached itself to him permanently. Marcus watched the consequences unfold without commentary. He did not celebrate their downfall. He did not seek vengeance. Justice, to him, was not about spectacle. It was about correction. His attention remained fixed on rebuilding a department that had revealed its worst instincts in public. By the end of the week, federal prosecutors announced formal indictments. Court dates were set. Oversight frameworks were drafted. Independent monitors were named. The Oak Ridge Police Department was no longer just a local agency. It had become a national case study in accountability. What began as an unlawful stop at a gas station had evolved into a full reckoning. Evidence had spoken. Authority had been stripped. And the work Marcus Thompson had come to Oak Ridge to do was no longer theoretical. It was active, irreversible, and unfolding under the eyes of an entire nation. The trial unfolded under a weight few federal courtrooms ever carry. From the first morning, it was clear this case was not about competing versions of events. It was about accountability, recorded in real time and preserved without gaps. John Harlan and Mike Donnelly sat at the defense table in a San Francisco federal courtroom, no longer protected by uniforms, seniority, or silence. They wore suits that could not disguise the absence of authority. Cameras were barred from the room, but the evidence had already been seen by millions. The courtroom felt less like a place of discovery and more like a place where facts were given their legal names. Federal prosecutors moved with restraint and precision. They did not raise their voices. They did not editorialize. They let the record speak. The first exhibit was the fixed camera above the gas station entrance. The wide-angle shot showed the approach, the blocking of the exit, the posture, the distance closed without cause. Then came the dash cameras, the body cameras, the bystander videos, layered and synchronized, each confirming the others down to the second. Jurors watched Marcus Thompson calmly identify himself by name. They watched suspicion invented aloud. They watched the takedown, the knee, the stillness, the shouted command to stop resisting when there was no resistance. They watched Donnelly turn away and injure himself. They watched the lie collapse in real time. And finally, they watched the badge appear. The courtroom stayed silent. Every person, every observer knew the weight of what they were witnessing, the unraveling of authority, the exposure of truth. No defense theory could compete with what was visible. The prosecution called witnesses in an order that built clarity without drama. A forensic analyst testified to timestamps and angles, explaining how independent recordings aligned perfectly. A medical expert described the injuries, separating self-inflicted wounds from injuries caused by force. A use of force instructor explained standard procedure and then explained each deviation. The words were careful, measured. The conclusions were unavoidable. Dr. Eleanor Hayes took the stand on the third day. She walked slowly to the witness box, her steps deliberate, steady despite her age. She spoke without notes, her voice clear. She described the moment she recognized danger, the shift in the air as force was applied unjustifiably, the way Marcus had remained composed under pressure. She explained the knee, the refusal to stop, the calm voice beneath it all.
"I taught constitutional law for decades," she said evenly, her words unwavering. "What I witnessed was not a mistake, it was abuse." The defense asked a single question, then they stopped. There was nothing more to add. Luisa Gomez testified next. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, but her voice was steady, strong. She explained why she began recording, why she didn't stop, even as tension mounted. She described the moment she saw Donnelly hurt himself, the instant she realized the lie would fail. When the defense suggested confusion or misinterpretation, the prosecutor replayed Luisa's video in open court. The questioning ended there. Special Agent Lisa Chen took the stand to testify about the investigation. She explained how footage from separate sources aligned to the second, how radio logs confirmed there had been no threat call, how medical documentation contradicted Donnelly's report, and how text messages sent afterward revealed attempts to coordinate false explanations. "This case does not rely on inference," Agent Chen said, her tone clinical, cold. "It relies on records." Her testimony was devastating, unassailable. Finally, Marcus Thompson took the stand. He did not speak as a man seeking sympathy. He spoke as a professional explaining a failure of duty, with the authority of someone who had seen too many systems fail to look away. He described his restraint, his effort to de-escalate, his decision to narrate events aloud so the record would be clear. He explained why calm matters when power is abused. He described the pain briefly, without emphasis. Then he returned to principle. When asked what he wanted from the court, he did not hesitate. "Accountability," he said, "so this does not happen again." The room remained still. There was no drama. There was only truth, calmly and firmly stated. The defense attempted to argue stress, confusion, and split-second judgment, but the prosecutor responded by replaying the footage again, slowly, frame by frame. Seconds stretched into eternity. Confusion vanished, intent remained. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdicts came back unanimous, guilty on all counts. There was no gasp, no outburst, only a quiet understanding that the outcome had been inevitable from the moment the cameras captured the truth. The facts had spoken for themselves. Sentencing followed weeks later. The judge spoke plainly, without flourish. He described the harm done to Marcus Thompson, to the department, and to the public trust. He emphasized the abuse of authority and the deliberate nature of the actions. John Harlan was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison for civil rights violations under color of law and aggravated assault. The judge noted Harlan's seniority as an aggravating factor, not a shield. Mike Donnelly received 17 years for fabrication of evidence, false reporting, and civil rights violations. The judge stated clearly that Donnelly's attempt to create a false narrative compounded the harm.
Sophia Ramirez and Chris Fletcher, having cooperated but failed to intervene, were each sentenced to 4 years for their roles. All were barred permanently from law enforcement. The city of Oak Ridge agreed to a civil settlement with Marcus Thompson in the amount of $4.5 million. Marcus accepted the settlement without ceremony. He announced immediately that every dollar would be directed to body camera programs, independent oversight initiatives, and anti-bias training organizations. This was never about compensation, he said in a brief statement. It was about correction. The decision shifted the public conversation. The money became a tool, not a prize. The focus was now on the work to be done. The public no longer saw the settlement as a victory for Marcus, but as a tool for reform. The personal consequences for those involved were severe and lasting. Harlan lost his pension, his home went into foreclosure, his marriage ended quietly in prison. Stripped of the authority that had once defined him, he struggled to adjust. Months later, he wrote a letter acknowledging his prejudice and asking for forgiveness, but the damage was done. He could never return to the world he had once known. Donnelly fared no better. His attempt to deceive made him a symbol of cowardice, even among those inclined to excuse misconduct. Inside holding, he was isolated. Outside, his name became shorthand for disgrace. The stigma attached itself permanently. He would never be seen the same way again. Marcus watched the consequences unfold without commentary. He did not celebrate their downfall. He did not seek vengeance. Justice to him was not about spectacle, it was about correction. His attention remained fixed on rebuilding a department that had revealed its worst instincts in public. By the end of the week, federal prosecutors announced formal indictments. Court dates were set, oversight frameworks were drafted, independent monitors were named. The Oak Ridge Police Department was no longer just a local agency. It had become a national case study in accountability. What began as an unlawful stop at a gas station had evolved into a full reckoning. Evidence had spoken. Authority had been stripped. And the work Marcus Thompson had come to Oak Ridge to do was no longer theoretical. It was active, irreversible, and unfolding under the eyes of an entire nation. The trial unfolded under a weight few federal courtrooms ever carry. From the first morning, it was clear this case was not about competing versions of events. It was about accountability, recorded in real time and preserved without gaps. John Harlan and Mike Donnelly sat at the defense table in a San Francisco federal courtroom, no longer protected by uniforms, seniority, or silence. They wore suits that could not disguise the absence of authority. Cameras were barred from the room, but the evidence had already been seen by millions.
The courtroom felt less like a place of discovery and more like a place where facts were given their legal names. Federal prosecutors moved with restraint and precision. They did not raise their voices. They did not editorialize. They let the record speak. The first exhibit was the fixed camera above the gas station entrance. The wide-angle shot showed the approach, the blocking of the exit, the posture, the distance closed without cause. Then came the dash cameras, the body cameras, the bystander videos, layered and synchronized, each confirming the others down to the second. Jurors watched Marcus Thompson calmly identify himself by name. They watched suspicion invented aloud. They watched the takedown, the knee, the stillness, the shouted command to stop resisting when there was no resistance. They watched Donnelly turn away and injure himself. They watched the lie collapse in real time. And finally, they watched the badge appear. The courtroom stayed silent. Every person, every observer knew the weight of what they were witnessing, the unraveling of authority, the exposure of truth. No defense theory could compete with what was visible. The prosecution called witnesses in an order that built clarity without drama.
A forensic analyst testified to timestamps and angles, explaining how independent recordings aligned perfectly. A medical expert described the injuries, separating self-inflicted wounds from injuries caused by force. A use of force instructor explained standard procedure and then explained each deviation. The words were careful, measured. The conclusions were unavoidable. Dr. Eleanor Hayes took the stand on the third day. She walked slowly to the witness box, her steps deliberate, steady despite her age. She spoke without notes, her voice clear. She described the moment she recognized danger, the shift in the air as force was applied unjustifiably, the way Marcus had remained composed under pressure. She explained the knee, the refusal to stop, the calm voice beneath it all. "I taught constitutional law for decades," she said evenly, her words unwavering. "What I witnessed was not a mistake. It was abuse." The defense asked a single question. Then they stopped. There was nothing more to add. Luisa Gomez testified next. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, but her voice was steady, strong. She explained why she began recording, why she didn't stop, even as tension mounted. She described the moment she saw Donnelly hurt himself, the instant she realized the lie would fail. When the defense suggested confusion or misinterpretation, the prosecutor replayed Luisa's video in open court. The questioning ended there. Special Agent Lisa Chen took the stand to testify about the investigation. She explained how footage from separate sources aligned to the second, how radio logs confirmed there had been no threat call, how medical documentation contradicted Donnelly's report, and how text messages sent afterward revealed attempts to coordinate false explanations. "This case does not rely on inference," Agent Chen said, her tone clinical, cold. "It relies on records." Her testimony was devastating, unassailable. Finally, Marcus Thompson took the stand. He did not speak as a man seeking sympathy. He spoke as a professional explaining a failure of duty with the authority of someone who had seen too many systems fail to look away. He described his restraint, his effort to de-escalate, his decision to narrate events aloud so the record would be clear. He explained why calm matters when power is abused. He described the pain briefly, without emphasis. Then he returned to principle. When asked what he wanted from the court, he did not hesitate. "Accountability," he said, "so this does not happen again." The room remained still. There was no drama. There was only truth, calmly and firmly stated. The defense attempted to argue stress, confusion, and split-second judgment, but the prosecutor responded by replaying the footage again, slowly, frame by frame. Seconds stretched into eternity. Confusion vanished, intent remained. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdicts came back unanimous, guilty on all counts. There was no gasp, no outburst, only a quiet understanding that the outcome had been inevitable from the moment the cameras captured the truth. The facts had spoken for themselves. Sentencing followed weeks later. The judge spoke plainly, without flourish. He described the harm done to Marcus Thompson, to the department, and to the public trust. He emphasized the abuse of authority and the deliberate nature of the actions. John Harlan was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison for civil rights violations under color of law and aggravated assault. The judge noted Harlan's seniority as an aggravating factor, not a shield. Mike Donnelly received 17 years for fabrication of evidence, false reporting, and civil rights violations. The judge stated clearly that Donnelly's attempt to create a false narrative compounded the harm. Sophia Ramirez and Chris Fletcher, having cooperated but failed to intervene, were each sentenced to 4 years for their roles. All were barred permanently from law enforcement. The city of Oak Ridge agreed to a civil settlement with Marcus Thompson in the amount of $4.5 million. Marcus accepted the settlement without ceremony. He announced immediately that every dollar would be directed to body camera programs, independent oversight initiatives, and anti-bias training organizations.
This was never about compensation, he said in a brief statement. It was about correction. The decision shifted the public conversation. The money became a tool, not a prize. The focus was now on the work to be done. The public no longer saw the settlement as a victory for Marcus, but as a tool for reform. The personal consequences for those involved were severe and lasting. Harlan lost his pension, his home went into foreclosure, his marriage ended quietly in prison. Stripped of the authority that had once defined him, he struggled to adjust. Months later, he wrote a letter acknowledging his prejudice and asking for forgiveness, but the damage was done. He could never return to the world he had once known.
Donnelly fared no better. His attempt to deceive made him a symbol of cowardice, even among those inclined to excuse misconduct. Inside holding, he was isolated. Outside, his name became shorthand for disgrace. The stigma attached itself permanently. He would never be seen the same way again. Marcus watched the consequences unfold without commentary. He did not celebrate their downfall. He did not seek vengeance. Justice, to him, was not about spectacle. It was about correction. His attention remained fixed on rebuilding a department that had revealed its worst instincts in public. By the end of the week, federal prosecutors announced formal indictments, court dates were set, oversight frameworks were drafted, independent monitors were named. The Oak Ridge Police Department was no longer just a local agency. It had become a national case study in accountability. What began as an unlawful stop at a gas station had evolved into a full reckoning. Evidence had spoken. Authority had been stripped. The work Marcus Thompson had come to Oak Ridge to do was no longer theoretical. It was active, irreversible, and unfolding under the eyes of an entire nation. The trial unfolded under a weight that few federal courtrooms ever carry. From the first morning, it was clear this case was not about competing versions of events. It was about accountability, recorded in real time and preserved without gaps. John Harlan and Mike Donnelly sat at the defense table in a San Francisco federal courtroom, no longer protected by uniforms, seniority, or silence. They wore suits that could not disguise the absence of authority. Cameras were barred from the room, but the evidence had already been seen by millions. The courtroom felt less like a place of discovery and more like a place where facts were given their legal names. Federal prosecutors moved with restraint and precision. They did not raise their voices. They did not editorialize. They let the record speak. The first exhibit was the fixed camera above the gas station's entrance. The wide-angle shot showed the approach, the blocking of the exit, the posture, and the distance closed without cause. Then came the dash cameras, the body cameras, the bystander videos, layered and synchronized, each confirming the others down to the second. Jurors watched Marcus Thompson calmly identify himself by name. They watched suspicion invented aloud. They watched the takedown, the knee, the stillness, the shouted command to stop resisting when there was no resistance. They watched Donnelly turn away and injure himself. They watched the lie collapse in real time. And finally, they watched the badge appear. The courtroom stayed silent. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus never replied. Some accountability does not require closure. Donnelly's consequences followed a different path. Within prison, his actions defined him. His attempt to deceive marked him permanently, even years after his release. He sought community service as a form of atonement, but the record followed him everywhere. Redemption, if it came at all, would be slow and incomplete.
For Marcus, the trial was not an ending, it was confirmation. The verdicts affirmed what evidence had already proven. Abuse collapses when documented. Authority does not survive the record when it is misused. He returned to Oak Ridge with a mandate no chief ever wants, but fully understands. Reform would be comprehensive, public, and permanent. As the courtroom emptied on the final day, there was no celebration. There was only finality. The law had spoken clearly, and for the first time in Oak Ridge's history, it had spoken inward, without hesitation, without protection, and without fear. Reform did not arrive as a slogan or a press conference. It arrived as sustained pressure applied carefully, without pause. Marcus Thompson understood that what had been exposed in Oak Ridge could not be corrected with gestures. Trust, once broken, does not return because it is requested. It returns only when systems change in ways that cannot be quietly reversed. From his first full day back in the office, Marcus made it clear that reform would not be symbolic. It would be structural, documented, and permanent. His first directive removed discretion from the most sensitive decisions. Every use of force, without exception, would be reviewed by an independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power. No internal filtering, no quiet resolutions. Findings would be published, names would be attached. Officers understood immediately that the old protections no longer applied. Some resisted, some complained. Marcus did not argue, he enforced. Body camera policy was rewritten line by line. Cameras were mandatory at all times on duty. Any interruption required written justification and immediate supervisor review. Footage could not be delayed, edited, or selectively released. Failure to comply resulted in suspension. Repeated violations resulted in termination. Within months, compliance reached nearly 100%. Behavior changed accordingly. When actions are recorded, restraint follows. Training was rebuilt from the ground up. Annual seminars were replaced with weekly instruction, bias recognition, de-escalation under stress, constitutional limits. Officers were tested, not just briefed. Those who failed were retrained. Those who refused were dismissed. Marcus made no apologies for the attrition. A smaller department with integrity was better than a larger one without it. Community oversight meetings were scheduled monthly and held in public spaces, not government buildings. Marcus attended every session during the first year. He did not stand at a podium. He sat among residents and listened. When people described fear, he did not correct them. When they described anger, he did not defend the past. He acknowledged failure directly. He explained changes clearly. He answered questions without deflection. Slowly, the tone shifted. Complaints initially increased, not because misconduct rose, but because reporting finally felt safe. Marcus treated that increase as progress. Within a year, measurable outcomes followed. Use of force incidents dropped sharply. Citizen complaints declined after peaking early. Crime fell without aggressive tactics. Clearance rates improved as cooperation returned. Officers began to understand that accountability did not weaken their authority, it stabilized it. Data replaced defensiveness. Evidence replaced excuses. National attention followed. Departments across the country requested guidance. Marcus declined appearances that framed him as a hero. He accepted those focused on policy and implementation. He spoke plainly about what had failed and why. At congressional hearings, he emphasized oversight as prevention, not punishment. His message was consistent. Abuse survives where documentation fails. He said, reform survives only when transparency cannot be undone. Journalists eventually labeled the changes the Washington model, a framework built on independent review, mandatory recording, and civilian authority. Marcus did not trademark it. He did not promote it. He allowed others to adopt it freely. Several departments did. Some succeeded, others struggled. Marcus understood that reform required leadership willing to absorb backlash. Not everyone was willing. The Shell station on Bayview Avenue became a quiet landmark. At the request of residents, a small bronze plaque was installed near the entrance. It bore a simple inscription, "Site where justice was recorded." Marcus did not attend the installation. He did not want the moment personalized. He wanted it remembered accurately. Evidence, not individuals, had forced change. The cost remained. His rest never healed perfectly. Cold mornings brought a dull ache that reminded him of the pavement and the pressure. He accepted it without complaint. Pain was easier to carry than silence. He never spoke publicly about forgiveness. Forgiveness, he believed, was personal. Accountability was institutional.
John Harlan served his sentence largely isolated, stripped of the authority that had once defined him. Years into incarceration, he admitted to a reporter that prejudice had shaped his actions. The admission changed nothing. Society moved forward without him. Mike Donnelly's path was different, but no less heavy. After release, he sought supervised community work with at-risk youth. Some accepted his presence, many did not. Redemption, Marcus believed, could not be demanded. It could only be earned quietly over time. On a quiet afternoon, Marcus stood in his office overlooking the bay. The water was calm. The city moved steadily below. Inside the department, procedures were followed without drama. Cameras were visible. Reports were thorough. Officers greeted residents by name. Trust did not rely on promises anymore. It relied on proof. Marcus understood that progress was fragile, that vigilance could not relax. Reform was not a destination, it was maintenance. He thought briefly of the morning at the gas station, not with anger, but with clarity. That moment had stripped away illusion and left only evidence. It had revealed who would abuse power when unobserved and who would remain still and speak when crushed beneath it. The difference mattered. Marcus Thompson did not seek to become a symbol. Circumstance made him one. His response defined him. He refused to let violence define his legacy. He let accountability define the system.
Oak Ridge changed because it had to. Other cities followed because they saw that change was possible. The legacy was not perfect, no reform ever is, but it was real, measurable, and sustained. And in a nation watching closely, it proved something essential. When truth is recorded, when courage holds steady, and when authority finally examines itself without fear, justice does not whisper, it speaks clearly. And once heard, it cannot be ignored. Thank you for watching and standing with stories that demand accountability. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes justice still matters. Your support helps these stories be heard. If you want to perform at your best, just like Marcus did in this moment of incredible strength, you need the right support. Advanced Muscle Plus helped him maintain the physical endurance required to handle high-stress situations and lead with clarity. Don't wait. Take control of your strength and recovery today. Click the link in the description and pinned comment to purchase the exact supplement Marcus relied on. This product is available exclusively on the Authenticated website. Ensure you get the real deal and experience the difference it can make.